There is one powerful truth that can change a person's entire life. The way you see yourself shapes the way your life unfolds. If you believe you are helpless, your actions will follow that belief. If you believe you have nothing to offer, you may spend your life waiting for others to save you. But the moment you begin to see value within yourself, everything can change. This story begins at a busy train station. Every day, hundreds of people pass through that station. Some were rushing to work. Some were traveling to see family. Some were simply trying to get through another ordinary day. And in one quiet corner of the platform sat a beggar. He had been there for years. Each morning, he would sit in the same place, stretch out his hand, and ask passengers for money. Some people gave him a few coins. Some ignored him completely. Others walked past without even looking at his face. To most people, he was just another beggar at the station. And sadly, that was exactly how he saw himself too. He believed he had nothing. No money, no skills, no future, nothing to give, nothing to become. He was simply surviving, one coin at a time. One afternoon, while he was sitting near the platform, he noticed a man walking toward the train. The man was well dressed. He wore a sharp suit, polished shoes, and carried himself with confidence. Everything about him made the beggar think, "This man must be successful. If I ask him for money, maybe he will give me more than the others." So the beggar quickly stood up, walked toward the man, and stretched out his hand. "Sir," he said softly, "could you please help me?" The businessman stopped, but instead of reaching into his pocket, he looked at the beggar and asked a question that the beggar had never heard before. "Do you always ask people to give you something?" The beggar looked confused. The businessman continued, "Have you ever given anything to anyone?" The beggar froze. He had been asking people for money for years, but no one had ever asked him that. After a moment, he lowered his eyes and said, "Sir, I am just a beggar. I live by asking others for help. I have nothing to give." The businessman looked at him calmly. Then he said, "If you truly believe you have nothing to give, then why should anyone give anything to you?" The beggar did not know how to answer. The businessman continued, "I am a businessman. I believe in exchange. If you offer me something of value, I can give you something in return. But if you offer nothing, then you are only asking others to give without receiving anything." The beggar stood there in silence. The businessman was not angry. He was not cruel. His voice was calm, but his words went deep into the beggar's heart. Then the train arrived. The businessman stepped inside and disappeared, but his words stayed behind. That night, the beggar could not sleep. He kept thinking about what the businessman had said. If you want to receive, you must first learn to give. Again and again, those words repeated in his mind. But he kept asking himself, "What can I give? I have no money. I own nothing. I am just a beggar." For the next 2 days, he barely asked anyone for money. He simply sat at the station, lost in thought. Then, on the third day, something caught his eye. Near the side of the tracks, a small patch of wildflowers was growing. They were simple flowers, nothing expensive, nothing rare. But they were bright, colorful, and beautiful in their own quiet way. The beggar looked at them for a long time. Then an idea came to him. What if I gave people a flower whenever they gave me a coin? It sounded small, almost foolish, but for the first time in a long time, he felt a spark of hope. So he walked over, gently picked a handful of flowers, and returned to his usual place on the platform. Soon, a passenger dropped a coin into his hand. But this time, the beggar did something different. He smiled and offered the passenger a flower. The passenger looked surprised. "A flower?" the man asked. The beggar nodded. "Yes, thank you for your kindness." The passenger smiled and accepted it. A little later, another person gave him a coin. Again, the beggar handed over a flower. Then another person, and another, and another. Something strange began to happen. People were not just giving him money anymore. They were smiling. They were saying thank you. Some even stopped for a moment to speak with him. For the first time, the beggar was not only receiving, he was giving something back. By the end of the day, he noticed something important. Whenever he had flowers to give, people gave him more money. But when he ran out of flowers, fewer people stopped. That was when he began to understand. People did not only want to give out of pity, they liked receiving something in return, even something as small as a flower. Day after day, the beggar continued this new habit. He collected flowers in the morning and gave one to every person who helped him. Slowly, more people began to notice him. Some passengers even looked forward to seeing him at the station. He was still poor, but something inside him had changed. He no longer felt like a man who had nothing. He had something to offer. One day, while handing out flowers, he suddenly saw the same businessman again. The beggar's eyes lit up. He ran toward him and said, "Sir, today I have something to give you." The businessman turned and looked at him. The beggar held out a few flowers and said, "If you give me money, I will give you these flowers in return." The businessman smiled. He took out some money, handed it to the beggar, and accepted the flowers. Then he said, "Now you understand the value of exchange." The beggar listened carefully. The businessman continued, "Today, you are no longer just a beggar. You have become a businessman." Those words struck the beggar deeply. A businessman? He had never thought of himself that way before. The train arrived, and the businessman stepped away. But once again, his words remained in the beggar's mind. "I am a businessman." The beggar repeated the sentence quietly to himself. At first, it sounded impossible, but then he began to think. People were giving him money, and he was giving them flowers. They were not only helping him out of pity, they were receiving something from him. He was creating value. Maybe he was not just begging anymore. Maybe he was trading. Maybe he had been seeing himself the wrong way all along. That day, the beggar made a decision that changed his life. He left the train station, not to beg somewhere else, but to start something new. He began selling flowers properly. At first, it was small. He bought a few flowers, sold them, saved a little money, and bought more. He worked hard. He learned from people. He made mistakes, but he kept going. Weeks passed. Then, months, and little by little, the man who once sat on the platform asking for coins built a real flower business. 6 months later, at that same train station, two well-dressed men met on the platform. One of them was the businessman. The other was a man in clean clothes, carrying himself with confidence. They shook hands. The businessman looked at him closely and said, "Have we met before?" The other man smiled. "Yes," he said, "we have met twice before, right here at this station." The businessman studied his face. Then his eyes widened. "Wait," he said. "You are the beggar, the man I refused to give money to, and later, the man who gave me flowers." The former beggar laughed gently. "Yes," he said, "that was me, but I am not a beggar anymore. I now run a flower business, and I am traveling to expand it." The businessman was amazed. "That is incredible," he said. "What changed?" The flower seller smiled and answered, "You taught me one of the greatest lessons of my life. We receive more when we learn to give. That day, I realized I was not truly a beggar. I only saw myself as one." He paused for a moment. "Once I changed the way I saw myself, my life began to change too." The two men shook hands again, but this time, they did not stand before each other as a rich man and a beggar. They stood as equals. Two men, two journeys, two futures, and one powerful lesson. Your life is shaped by the way you see yourself. If you believe you are small, you will live small. If you believe you have nothing to offer, you may never discover the value already inside you. But when you begin to see yourself as capable, useful, and worthy, your actions begin to change. And when your actions change, your results change. Success does not always begin with money. It does not always begin with opportunity. It does not always begin with someone saving you. Sometimes, success begins with one simple question. What can I give? Maybe you can give your time. Maybe you can give your kindness. Maybe you can give your effort. Maybe you can give your knowledge, your creativity, your service, or your courage. Even the smallest thing you offer can become the beginning of a new life. So do not limit yourself by the story you have been telling yourself. You are not defined by where you are today. You are shaped by what you believe, what you choose, and what you are willing to give. Change your mindset, and your actions will change. Change your actions, and your future will change. And one day, you may look back and realize that the life you were waiting for began the moment you decided to see yourself differently. Because when your mindset changes, your life changes.